Welcome to Something to Live By. My name is Tony Edwards. Thank you so much for tuning in to the program. And we hope that something is said in the program tonight that will help you have a different outlook on life, different outlook on God. And I just pray that much good has been coming from the program for those of you who've been following us. And if this is your first time, we want you to tune in every week. Every week we air at 9 o'clock p.m. And we would love for you to invite your family and friends to join in and follow us. And if you have topics or Bible questions that you would like to ask or recommend, then you can send them to somethingtolivebyshow@gmail.com. And we do our best to get those answered, or may even discuss a topic that you suggested. Also, if you are a person who may not be sure about your salvation, and you want to know more about what it means to be saved or whether or not you've done it the right way, I want you to visit www.bornagaingodsway.com. All caps, bornagaingodsway.com, and take those 7 lessons. And by the end of those 7 lessons, I'm sure that there are things that may be cleared up in your understanding, or you may just find out that you are or have been saved the way God has said. Tonight, I want to talk about the subject of bitterness and resentment. In my opinion, I believe bitterness and resentment, probably out of all of the sins that we bother with, probably it may be the greatest sin in our lives. And the reason I say that is because of personal experience. It is very difficult to forget things that people do to you. It's very difficult to forget things that people say to you that hurt you. And trying to get over those things as the years go by can be a challenge. And if you don't get over those things, what happens is you begin to meditate and think about those things day after day, week after week, year after year. And that anger that is produced from the thoughts of what someone did to you, it leads to strong feelings of resentment. And resentment is no good to anybody, especially not yourself. I sat down, and as I was thinking about this, I've got a couple of lessons on bitterness and a couple of lessons on resentment. I said, well, let me go online and see what others have said about the subject. And you know, everything that I read online was pretty much similar to my own information and similar to each other. And that is the cause of resentment and bitterness and how you actually get rid of it. But I did find an article online that I want to refer to in this program. I'm not sure who the author is of this particular article. I found it on a biblical counseling website. And the title of the article is called The Heart of Bitterness. And I won't read the whole thing, but there are portions of this that I'm going to read and comment on. And I want to see tonight, can we find a recipe for ourselves? Can we find a recipe that can help us overcome the bitterness and the resentment in our lives? The article starts off by saying this: understanding bitterness, understanding the bitter heart. Bitterness is unresolved, unforgiven anger and resentment. It is a result of anger changing from an experience to a belief. Bitterness is seething. Bitterness is constant. Bitter people carry the same burden as angry people, but to a greater extent. And you know, the author has a very good point because, by the way, make sure you have a copy of God's Word, something to write with, something to write on. And the first place we're going to turn to is Hebrews chapter 12, because when the Hebrew writer wrote this book, one of the things that he pointed out and had to address with his audience had to do with the subject of bitterness. And we find that in Hebrews chapter 12, and verse 15. So turn over there with me, Hebrews chapter 12. As a matter of fact, let's start at verse 12. Hebrews 12, verse 12. Notice what it says. Therefore, strengthen the hands which hang down, and the feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather healed. Pursue peace with all people, and with holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Now watch verse 15. Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, and lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. Bitterness is a terrible, terrible sin. It causes trouble. It causes trouble in your own life. It causes trouble for you and others that you love. You see, the issue with bitterness is that it doesn't just affect you. Bitterness affects those around you. A bitter person, a person who carries resentment, affects those who are around them by the attitude that they have. They're always angry. They're always upset. They're always moody. They're always short-tempered. And a lot of that comes from the bitterness and the anger that they carry every day. And you begin to destroy relationships of people who care about you. You begin to destroy relationships of friends, people who've tried to be there for you. You begin to destroy all these relationships on your job, all because something that you're holding on to has changed you from the person you used to be into a person that many people do not know. So trying to get rid of bitterness in our lives is very, very important. A story that this author refers to that's a popular story in the Old Testament about bitterness is the story of Naomi. And that's found in the book of Ruth. And so what I want to do, I want to turn over here to the book of Ruth. And I want to look at this story about Naomi and how her bitterness came into her life and how she was, or who it was that she blamed because of her bitterness. Okay, in Ruth chapter 1, this is the story of a man named Elimelech. And what happened is, while they were living in their home country, a famine came. And after this famine came, Elimelech had to take his family into a different land to try to find food, okay? All right, so when he left, he took his wife, he took his children, and he went into his sons, and he went into this land, the land of Moab, and they stayed in the land of Moab. They lived in the land of Moab. While they were in the land of Moab, Elimelech died. Elimelech's wife was Naomi. So Naomi's husband died. Not only did Naomi's husband die, her two sons also died. And so she was left with her daughter-in-laws and herself. Could you imagine a mom leaving her home country with her family? And then when time came for her to return to her home country because they found out that there was food there now, she returned with only her daughter-in-laws. All the rest of her family that she had known and that she had loved had died. Well, this caused some bitterness in Naomi. As a matter of fact, in Ruth chapter 1, verse number 18, after Ruth told Naomi that she would, the other two daughter-in-laws, Naomi told them, listen, I don't want y'all to worry about following me back home. I want y'all to go back to your land, go back to your people, find you another husband, and just let me go on with my life, because I want you all to have your own life. And the two daughter-in-laws said, okay. And they went home, but Ruth said, no, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Wherever you lie, I'm not going to depart from you. And so in Ruth chapter 1, verse 18, when she saw that she was determined, that is Naomi, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. She stopped trying to get her to leave, and she said, okay. Verse 19, now the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem. They were back home. And it came to pass when they had come to Bethlehem that all the city was excited because of them. And the women said, is this Naomi? Is this Naomi? And in verse 20, Naomi said to them, do not call me Naomi. Do not call me Naomi. Why? Well, we're going to stop right there at that question, and we'll pick up with that question from Naomi after we come back from question time. Last week's question on question time was this right here. Some people say Moses had horns. Did Moses really have horns, or is there a mistake somewhere? Well, actually, the idea that Moses had horns comes from a picture that was done by Michelangelo. I think he paints a picture of Moses with the Ten Commandments, and he also has two horns on the top of Moses' head. Well, he got the idea from the Latin Vulgate. The Latin Vulgate is the Latin translation of the Greek New Testament that Jerome did, St. Jerome did around the end of the 4th century BC. And in the Latin Vulgate, in Exodus chapter 34 and verse 29, it talks about Moses coming down from Mount Sinai, and it said that Moses' face was shone. Shone. The Hebrew word there is koran. His face was shone. Well, the Latin Vulgate translated that verse as saying that Moses had two horns protruding out of his head. Now, whether this was a mistake or not, or whether Jerome actually believed that, I'm not sure. But the word Quran there has two different meanings. One of the meanings for the word Quran is to shoot forth horns. But the other meaning means to shine bright. Only the Latin Vulgate translated it that way. All of our modern translations translate Exodus chapter 34, verse 29 as Moses' face being bright and radiant, which I think is the proper translation. I don't think Moses had horns, but many people have thought that because of the translation of Jerome's Latin Vulgate. Okay, let's see what the next question is on question time. Welcome to another episode of Question Time. This week's question is, let me see. Should I give you a trick question or should I give you a real question? Let me give you a real question. When or was the Bible written in chapters and verses? If the Bible was not written in chapters and verses, then who was it and when were the chapters and verses put in the Bible? That's a pretty easy one there. See you next week on Question Time. All right, welcome back from Question Time. When we left off, we left off with the question that Naomi asked the people in her hometown. And the question she asked them is found in Ruth chapter 1 and verse 20. She asked she made the statement, do not call me Naomi. Or if she had to pose it in a question, she would have said, why are you calling me? Why are you calling me Naomi? And either way it goes, either one of those would work because of the reasoning she's about to give them. So don't call me Naomi. Why are you calling me Naomi? The point is the same. And what is the point? The point is she wanted them to call her Marah. And the reason why is because she said the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with her. She went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. You see, in Naomi's case, her bitterness came from her believing that God brought this into her life. She believed that God was the cause of her family not being with her anymore. So she didn't want to be called Naomi anymore. She didn't want to be called anything but Marah, which means God has dealt bitterly with me. Now, whatever the blame is and whoever the blame is, bitterness is the same. It affects everyone to a certain extent the same way, others more severely than some. But it's a very bad thing that needs to be taken completely out of our lives so that we can focus on the things that are important in life. Naomi blamed God, back to this article here. Naomi blamed God for her life being bitter. All she could see was that she no longer had what she once loved. Perhaps you struggle with the same type of bitterness. Sometimes in women and men who have lost children due to illnesses or accidents blame God for their loss. God, how could you take my beloved child from me? Don't you know how much I love him? How could you do me like this? An abandoned spouse may become bitter and say the same things. God, do you know how much I'm struggling to raise these kids by myself? How can you let this happen to me? I'm the one who was faithful, and now I am the one who is miserable, and you allowed this to happen. Why are you punishing me? These feelings that I'm reading to you from this article, they're real. And I know they're real, and you know they're real because you may be one of the ones who are experiencing some of these feelings. The honest businessman sees a crook businessman prospering while he flounders. God, how can you stand by and let this happen? I am an honest businessman and my business is falling apart. How can you let him get away with such thievery? I have a wife and kids to feed, God. Why are you doing this to me? The childless couple is bitter when they see families with several children and they cannot seem to have even one. God, why is this happening to us? You become bitter out of belief that God will not punish the people who hurt you, that God does not hear your plea, or that he does not care about your plight. Since God is apparently not going to intervene in your circumstances, you stand in as judge, jury, and executioner in the lives of other people. That's a good point. When we are in a situation where someone has done something to us, we either blame God or we blame them. Since we don't have a lot of power to get back at God other than the fact that we hold things against God, a lot of times we take it out on people around us, whether those people are directly related to the problem or indirectly related. Those who are indirectly related, we take it out on them through our actions, our hateful actions of anger and lack of patience. But for those people who are directly the reason for our problems, those are the people that we try to get back at, whether it's through our actions or whether it's through our hate, our bitterness, and our resentment. We hold these things against those individuals for the rest of our lives, only to the detriment of ourselves and not them. They go on with their lives. They wake up every day and they don't have another thought of you or I. And yet every day goes by and we are the ones seething with the constant thought of what has been done to us. It becomes a circular pattern, the author says. The more you dwell on what has been done to you, the injustice you have suffered, or the loss you have incurred, the deeper the root of bitterness goes. You already know that carrying around a load of bitterness is exhausting. So why continue to carry it? Bitterness hardens your heart on the inside and your features on the outside. I love the way he says that statement. Bitterness hardens your heart on the inside and your features on the outside. A person who is bitter is extremely hard to hide it. It also defiles those around you because bitterness is contagious. So bitterness is a very, very bad sin in our lives. Having said that, how do you get rid of it? How do you get rid of bitterness? Well, there are a number of ways that have been suggested. This author here lists a couple of ways. Number one, bitterness, you must understand the only cure for bitterness and anger is forgiveness. Forgiveness is the number one cure. It's not the only cure, but it's the number one cure for bitterness and anger, forgiveness. Bitterness is focused on what has been done to you. To break up bitterness, you must also be willing to look at what you have done to others. You know, it's easy for us who have dealt with bitterness to be bitter because of what someone has done to us. But let's stop for a moment and focus on the times that we have hurt people. Focus on the times that we have done things to people in the past. Focus on times where we have done things to God in the past. Yet, because of God's love, He has forgotten about those things. He's forgiven us of those things. And because God has forgiven us of those things that we have done in our lives to other people, it gives us peace. It enables us to be able to lie down at night and rest because we know God has completely forgotten about the things that we have done to other people. Well, the same forgiveness that we expect from God when we ask for forgiveness should be the same forgiveness that we extend to those people who have hurt us. It's about cleaning out our lives as well as trying to get rid of the things that people have done to us out of our hearts also. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 3 through 5, when Jesus was talking about judging there, He wasn't saying that it was wrong to judge, but what He was saying is this: before you can judge, make sure you clean the mote out of the beam that's in your own eye. Clean it out first before you start trying to clean the mote that is in someone else's eye. It's okay to be hurt, and it's okay to be angry because someone did something to you. It's a natural reaction. But in the process of being hurt, in the process of being angry, make sure that we look at our own lives and see the people that we hurt as well. And when we start looking at the people that we have hurt and the grace that God has given us after we hurt someone else, then that would motivate us to extend that same grace and mercy to the people who hurt us. The author says the examination process begins right here at home with you and with me. We start to ask God to help us. In Psalms chapter 139, verse 23 through 24, search me, the psalmist says, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you and lead me along the path of everlasting life. The psalmist sought to clean himself up in his relationship to God so that he, I'm sure, could extend that same grace and mercy to the people that he came in contact with. There needs to be a willingness on our part to forsake our own sins and to clean our own lives up before we can sit around and judge someone else because of what they did to us. Let me tell you something. Life over the years has taught me a lot about patience and compassion. Through my own failures and through my own stupidity and my foolishness, it has taught me a lot about having grace and mercy and compassion for the people who hurt us. And I'm telling you, in every situation I've found myself in where someone has done something to me to snatch my heart out, I always realize the hearts that I've snatched out, and I've always told myself, Lord, give me the strength to give them the grace and mercy that you have shown me. Forgiveness is number one cure when it comes to overcoming bitterness and resentment. Confessing our sins to God while we ask God to forgive the sins of others on our behalf is important. And it's important that we verbally state those things and we express those things to God so that God can help us get rid of the bitterness and the resentment in us. The author says forgiveness is not an option. It's the Christian duty. It requires our commitment and willingness to extend something to people even if they don't deserve it. Colossians chapter 3, verse 12 through 13, since God chose you to be holy people whom He loves, you must clothe yourselves with tenderheartedness, mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. You must make allowance for each other's faults and forgive the person who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. And that, my friends, is the key to the whole thing when it comes to bitterness and resentment. We replace the feelings of anger, we replace the feelings of bitterness, we replace the feelings of resentment with the feelings of mercy, the feelings of humility, the feelings of kindness, and the feelings of gentleness. And in so doing that, we give ourselves the peace that we need to function as people of God, or just function in general. Because I'm telling you something, it's easier to function when you have extended mercy to someone than it is to function when that mercy is non-existent in your heart. I want to close it out with this right here. When it comes to us blaming God about things, remember this right here. Acceptance, according to the author, acceptance of hard things at the hand of a loving God is not easy, meaning this: when things happen to you, even if it comes to the point where we blame God for doing it, and the bitterness we have in our lives as a result, we think of God, remember this right here: God does not sin, and God only brings good into our lives. And there's a difference in God allowing bad things to happen and God causing bad things to happen. God doesn't bring hurt into your life. He may allow it, but even if He allows it, never forget Romans 8:28. All things work together for the good of those who love God and who are called according to His purpose. No matter what has happened to you to cause bitterness and resentment, God can use that situation for your betterment. Believe that. See you next time on Something to Live By.